Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Around the autumn of 1890, Daniel Burnham was given a project. Burnham was an architect and an extremely well-known architect in Chicago, and he'd been given a job like no other. He was expected to turn a boggy square mile into what would be the spotlight of the world. He was put in charge of the world's Columbian Exposition. He had just one tiny problem: the Eiffel Tower. On May 31st, 1889, Paris had its own exposition, and it quickly surpassed the Washington Monument to become the tallest man-made structure in the world. Now, Burnham had the unenviable job of surpassing the hoopla that surrounded the Eiffel Tower. And he had to fix things, but he didn't know what to do, and all the engineers around him didn't have a clue as to what to do. "Make no little plans," he said to his team of engineers. But they couldn't come up with anything that would rival the magnificence of the Eiffel Tower. Of course, there were proposals: a tower garlanded with rails to distant cities, another tower from whose top guests would just be pushed off in chairs, pretty much like today's bungee jumping. And Eiffel himself proposed an idea for the Chicago Exposition. He said, "Build a bigger tower than the one in Paris." Of course, all these ideas didn't fly. But now they had a problem. How could the Chicago Exposition outshine that really famous monument? Well, it was now famous, the Eiffel Tower. It seemed almost impossible to come up with something that would rival that French monument. And an engineer called Ferris had the answer. At this point, the ideas were going nowhere, and the Chicagoans were pulling their hair out. And a 33-year-old engineer from Pittsburgh, he came up with an idea. He said, "How about a revolving steel wheel? How about a huge revolving steel wheel?" So he came up with the sketches. He added additional specifications, and then he shared the idea with Burnham. But Burnham was not impressed. The slender rods of the wheel were too fragile. He said it would be madness to carry people to a height taller than the Statue of Liberty in such a fragile wheel. But Burnham wasn't just dealing with any old engineer. He was dealing with George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. And this guy would be forever associated with the Ferris wheel. In fact, Ferris was so convinced that his idea would work that he spent $25,000 of his own money. He hired more engineers, he recruited investors, and consider this: $25,000 back then would be over $650,000 in today's money. 100,000 parts or more went into the Ferris wheel, and an 89,320-pound axle had to be hoisted onto two towers 140 feet in the air. On June 21st, 1893, when it was launched, it was a stunning success. As the exposition went through the next 3 weeks, more than 1.4 million people paid 50 cents for a 20-minute ride. George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. had literally reinvented the wheel. The year we moved to New Zealand, I had to reinvent my own wheel. You see, I wasn't in marketing. I had no plans of being in marketing. I was already an established cartoonist back in Mumbai, India. And when I moved to New Zealand, I'd pretty much expected to continue to draw cartoons. In fact, I was so determined to take that cartoon career forward that when we moved, I had over 200 pounds, that's about 100 kilos of books, and we shipped all these across. Now, these weren't any ordinary books, these were the books that had graphic design on it and cartooning, and I'd accumulated all this stuff over the years. Plus, there were brochures. Before I left India, I had no idea what New Zealand had in store for me. So I printed business cards, as you do. But I also printed lavish 4-color brochures, postcards, stationery, and all this stuff I could use when I got to New Zealand. All this material had to be shipped by air, not by sea. And as you know, air is expensive. But I was in a big hurry to get going in this new country. Yet almost a year later, I had to reinvent what I was doing, and it was all because of one book. That book, Good to Great by Jim Collins, has sold over 2.5 million copies. But more importantly, it was the catalyst in my own reinvention. In 2000, as I got on the plane back to India, I had to go back because I had to tidy up things, sell the house, do all those kinds of things. And I had loads of time to read the book and mull over the ideas. And as I mentioned before in articles and podcasts, I realized that I would never reach any sort of greatness in cartooning. That's at least what I thought back then. To me, the pinnacle of cartooning was a comic strip. Calvin and Hobbes by Bill Watterson. That was the place I wanted to be. And if I couldn't get up to those lofty heights, it wasn't feeding my greatness appetite. And so I turned to something I was getting exceedingly good at doing, and that is creating taglines for small businesses. Without realizing it, I was wandering down the aisle of marketing. The book and that 19-hour flight, it did it for me. It put me on the quest to what I would consider my greatness journey. But just as it set the benchmarks, it also raised a ton of questions. Because this whole concept of good to great, it seems so massive. How do you know that you're choosing something correctly? How do you know that you will be great? All these stories of greatness bouncing around are about Apple and Boeing and Disney and Walmart. So how can a small business get to greatness without becoming big and dominant? Well, these are difficult questions, and it's best to keep the answers simple. Deep, yet simple. So let's take a trip and explore the 3 core elements required to get your own Ferris wheel going, even when the odds are stacked against you. In today's episode, we'll cover 3 elements as always, and the 3 things that we're going to cover are 1, the hedgehog principle, 2, preserving the core and stimulating progress, and 3rd, the big, hairy, audacious goal called the BHAG. Let's start off with the first one, which is the hedgehog principle. Avis, the car rental company, was pretty much in the doldrums. It's 1961, and Avis is losing $3.2 million a year, and there seemed no way to beat the domination of their biggest rival, which is Hertz. The 2 companies had been at each other's throats in the mid-1940s when Air Force officer Warren Avis, he created a niche out of thin air. Now, he traveled a lot, and then he decided that most car companies were downtown, and that's not a very convenient place to get a car if you just fly into a city. Business travel was growing steadily, and many executives would touch down, rent a car, drive to their meetings, and then drop the car back to the airport the very same day. But Hertz was not impressed. They continued to run their rental business downtown as if Avis didn't exist. Yet, over time, they found Avis gobbling up chunks of their business. It seemed logical to simply replicate what Avis had done, and so that's what they did. Hertz copied Avis's methods, at least that's what Avis claims. And with this move, Hertz signaled the start of a rivalry that exists to this day. But then along came the year 1962, and with it a creative agency called Doyle, Dane, Bernbach, which is DDB. The copywriter team of Paula Green and Helmut Krohn created an advertising campaign that would take Avis from losing $3.2 million to earning $1.2 million in profit. And more importantly, it would rock Hertz's smugness to its very core. From 1963 to 1966, Hertz's smug look turned to paralysis. Essentially, Avis was catching up. They ran this "we're only number 2 and we try harder." So immediately the public swung to Avis's side, which is, this is the underdog, they're trying harder. This captured the attention of the public, and now Hertz was struggling. Well, they weren't struggling, but they were losing market share very quickly. So we have to stop and ask ourselves, why did we try harder work? Why did this campaign work? When we look at the hedgehog concept outlined in Good to Great, the answer is more than apparent. The hedgehog principle consists of 3 pertinent questions. 1. What can you be the best in the world at? 2. What drives your economic engine? And 3rd, what are you deeply passionate about? Now, Avis could easily answer those questions, but only once it had the new ad campaign going. So, what was it the best in the world at? It was the best in the world at bending over backwards to making sure that car customers were happy. After all, it was only number 2. It couldn't afford to rest on its laurels, not that it had laurels in the first place. This concept of trying harder got the entire company to indeed try harder. They got the best in the world covered, and now the economic engine was purring away. And only one thing remained, and that was the passion. But the campaign itself had that. The "we try harder" might sound like just a slogan, but it was a slogan that drove the passion, and if the slogan of a company is right, it often drives that passion. So Avis ticked all the boxes. They were having their economic engine boosted, they were the best in the world at trying harder, and there was this whole passion behind it. Notice something though. Notice how money or the economic engine isn't really the focus of greatness. Money is important, that's for sure. A company will cough its way into oblivion if it can't fire up that economic engine. And yet, it's more than clear that for most of us at least, money is not a driving factor. All those website owners that show you how their income doubles and quintuples are still sitting on the same sofa, or at least a similar sofa as you do. They're still typing on the same yellowed keyboard. They may have doubled or quintupled the size of their house or boat, but when money becomes the only focus, there's really no time to enjoy the good stuff in life. Which is why the best in the world journey needs to start with what makes you deliriously happy. It's the stuff that wakes you up in the morning and keeps you going no matter what. Your work becomes your passion, and it's the complete opposite of trying to outsource everything and doing as little as possible. Money helps enormously in getting you to your goal, but it's the passion and the desire that's driving the car. And this is where confusion comes bouncing through the door. When I quit my career in cartooning, I was doing very well indeed. I'd moved to New Zealand, and despite being in a brand new market, the profit for the year was $75,000. Now picture me sitting at my computer, drawing cartoons, listening to music, and whenever I'm sleepy, I take a nap. You're getting the idea. It wasn't exactly like I was struggling to put food on the table. Still, the moment you decide to change things, the moment you decide you want to change things, it's so difficult. And the moment I decided I couldn't beat Calvin Hobbes, I was in trouble. Now, I'm good at a lot of things. I can work my way around Photoshop. I can cook really well. You've probably seen my food and travel photos on Facebook. And what you're getting is an idea of a looming problem, aren't you? The moment you can do more than one thing, you're not sure where to go. The journey to greatness, it seems to run right into a pool of quicksand. So how do you get yourself out of this mess and back on track? I decided that I didn't want to do cartooning, at least at that point in time. And I wanted to take this leap into marketing. But I didn't know much about marketing. Still, you are unsure of things. You're in a fog, and this marketing thing, it was this big, nameless, faceless profession. I didn't have a clue as to what the journey to greatness was going to look like. I didn't have a clue whether it existed at all. And that's when I ran into a subset of marketing. A subset is what starts the journey to greatness. My story was quite accidental, as yours might well be. I joined this networking group. It was called BNI. It's still called BNI. And we'd meet every Friday. We'd enjoy breakfast, and we'd hand out referrals. And while this referral giving was very important to me at the time, one factor was even more pivotal in helping me on my journey. BNI has this strange custom called the dance, as in dancing with a partner. In this so-called dance, you go across and visit one of the other members. For instance, I might go to the real estate agent at her office, and I'll meet with her and find out about her business. And another week, I might end up talking to the financial planner in the group. So you do these little dances all over the place. Being new and enjoying this extroverted behavior, I binged on the dance. I started meeting several members of the BNI group in quick succession. And then what they do in the meeting is they tell me what they did, often spending 10 to 20 minutes explaining the little details. Then I'd ponder about what they just said, and I'd boil it down to a single line. In effect, I'd given them a tagline, a working tagline that would get curiosity going and get their prospects interested. Now, the first time I encapsulated their 20-minute speech into a single line, I wasn't even aware of what I was doing. 20 or 30 taglines later, with everyone telling me how great I was at taglines, I decided to make my entry into marketing. I wasn't going to be the best in the world at marketing, but I could create a subset, and that's because a subset is simpler than a well laid out world domination plan. Which means that if you're going to make a career of teaching a program, say like InDesign, you don't have to take on every toolbar in the program. Just teach clients how to create an amazing ebook in under an hour. What you're doing there is you're creating a subset. If you're going to be the best in the world at WordPress sites, you're headed for chaos. Take on a subset. Take on a really small section. Like, say, maybe you can get clients to their destination on a website in just 3 steps. And what you've created here is a subset. Even all the great people in history, say Michelangelo, for instance, he made the statue of David his subset. He was already quite well known. He was already quite well paid. He was already on his way to the Sistine Chapel. But that journey started out with the subset, just carving that statue of David. Once you deal with the subset, passion almost force feeds you with energy. Avis found its passion once it had the subset of trying harder. They didn't try the grand scheme of trying to do everything with cars. And I found my subset quite by accident. I took on the tagline. And the moment you streamline your idea into one tiny bit, you'll get enormous control over that bit. You'll read more about the subset, and you'll practice it longer and harder. And soon it will take over your life, which effectively means you're done with two elements of the hedgehog principle all at once. You'll have your passion, thanks to your subset, and it puts you well and truly on the road to personal and professional greatness. And that just leaves one question. Will it drive your economic engine? Will it pay the bills? And how soon? I didn't know the answer to that question of the economic engine. In fact, I did something very silly in my quest for being the best in the world. I quit cartooning. Yep, just like that. One fine day I decided I wasn't going to do any more cartoons. And then something extremely strange happened. No one called me for a cartoon project anymore. Right up till that moment, I had been filling that balance sheet with decent profits. And suddenly, I didn't get a single call or email for another cartoon project. Now be aware that I was drawing stuff for ad agencies and magazine covers and local councils, even for private clients. And yet, it stopped. Almost as if I'd taken a full-page ad in a newspaper and said, Sean D'Souza doesn't want to draw any cartoons anymore, stop bugging him. My dream had come true, and I didn't have a buffer. Now this buffer concept is very important because the buffer isn't just money, it's also the buffer of knowledge and confidence. Remember, I wasn't a marketing guy, I was a cartoonist. That thought that you're not who you really are, it stays in your head and it undermines your confidence. So I went to the library, I stacked up 30 books at a time. I made that my top priority. We're talking about economic engines here, but knowledge plays a very big role in how you get paid. Having the skills to run a business is what allows you to make that engine go. I had to teach myself how to write great articles, how to create compelling copy, and yes, how to speak. That buffer was important for my economic engine, but money played its role too. And I did that silly thing. I jumped right into marketing and out of a business. So I'd spent a lot of time beefing up my learning skills, but I hadn't considered the factor that everything takes time to turn around. It was a very rash move, and luckily my wife Renuka, she had a decent job, and that paid the bills, the mortgage, and it helped me fumble forward towards this greatest in the world dream. Renuka also quit her job shortly after, and she joined Psychotactics. But that little buffer was all we needed. We were now on a trajectory to align ourselves with the hedgehog principle. Like Michelangelo, we could carve one David at a time. Like Avis, we just had to try harder, one car at a time. We were passionate about what we did. And the clients noticed, and the clients started to trickle in. But the hedgehog principle itself isn't enough. This takes us to our second part, where we look at a second, more important factor. In fact, Jim Collins, the author, he stresses that this is more important. He says that this is the most important of all the stuff he has written over the years. And it's called preserving the core and stimulating progress. Let's find out what this means for you and your small business. What we did here was we looked at the hedgehog principle. And the hedgehog principle essentially talks about what you can be the best in the world at, what drives your economic engine, and what you're deeply passionate about. And it's very important that this whole factor of being the greatest, the best in the world doesn't drive you crazy, because it's very easy to feel like you're not worthy of this. And yes, you are. You can be the best in the world, but you have to start with that subset. You have to start with that smaller section that enables you to then grow your status, your everything from there. It changes the way you think. You also have to take into consideration this buffer zone. If you're jumping from one business to another or from a job into a business, there's got to be some kind of buffer. And this buffer includes your knowledge, and the second buffer is some amount of money that is going to last you 3 months or 6 months or whatever it takes for you to get settled in. And that will drive your passion. If you don't have that money, if you don't have that buffer of knowledge, then it's always going to distract you, and that's very difficult to handle. It's very difficult to be the best in the world if you're just struggling all the time to pay the bills. So consider these factors, and that's our first installment of this whole Jim Collins saga. We'll come back to do the next one. That's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now, and see you on the next episode.
Let's get out of our